So at the outset, I would like to wish you all a happy new year and welcome you to the Pudavut Center to start in your company a new series of lectures and conferences on Iranian antiquity. Although I'm quite aware that in view of the many calamities that have befallen us collectively in the past few weeks, with promises of yet more to come, my optimism for a joyous new year may be subject to caution. But we at the Pudavut Center remain resolutely committed to this type of optimism. In this slide, I would like also to mention the strong subscription of the Center to the sacrosanctity of Iranian cultural sites, of which some 24 are filed with the World Heritage List of the UNESCO and hence belong to our common world patrimony. These sites, a great many of them registered to the good graces of our colleague, Professor Mousavi, have been listed and briefly commented by him in a document which we shall be posting imminently to the Center's website. It gives me great pleasure to begin this year's Pudavut lecture series with the contribution of my esteemed colleague, Dr. Everett Wheeler, who is currently a scholar in residence at the Duke University. Dr. Wheeler has held research positions from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. His research focuses on ancient military history and the Roman eastern frontier, the so-called limes, with special attention to the upper Euphrates and Transcaucasia. His publications are manifold and varied. I may mention his monographs, Stratagem and the Vocabulary of Military Trickery, published in 1988 with Brill. His co-translation with Peter Krenz of Polynius Strategica and related texts in 1994, and his volume on the armies of classical Greece, published in 2007 with Routledge. Among his many studies which are concerned with Roman and Parthian exchanges, I would like to mention his seminal works, Why the Romans Can't Defeat the Parthians, in 1997, the Roman treaties with Parthia, Völkerrecht, or Power Politics in 2002, the armies and limes in the east in 2007, and more recently, Roman-Armenian borders, the upper Euphrates frontier in 2017. Today's lecture, Parthians in the Roman army, investigates the presence of auxiliary Parthian horse archers in Roman armies by concentrating on two Parthian regiments, the so-called I Augusta Parthorum, that saw service all the way from the Rhine to North Africa and the east, and the so-called I Parthorum et Araborum, active on the Rhine. As Dr. Wheeler shall be arguing, the frontier between the Roman and Parthian empires was permeable to population movements, including exiles, dynasts, and their retinues, who would accept service as specialized auxiliary forces within the ranks of the imperial order. In today's lecture, we shall be exploring with Dr. Wheeler the fortunes of the Parthian horsemen and archers in the service of Rome. Please join me in welcoming him to the center. Please.
First of all, let me say what a delight it is to be back at UCLA. I was last here for an Armenian Studies conference 20 years ago, and so I guess once every 20 years, keeps me fresh for the audience here. Let me say that everything I am going to try to persuade you is true has already been argued is in detail in two long papers listed at the top of your handout. There you will find extensive argumentation and fatter footnotes than you probably want to read. These are available as PDFs upon request. Let me first just run through the handout to explain how it is organized. I first give you a list of known Parthian units in the army. The first one, as I argue, is one unit that went under different names at various places. Then the next section of the handout deals with some of the inscriptions dealing with the first unit listed there under known Parthian units, the I Parthorum, and various pieces of evidence related to that. And at the bottom of the page on page 2, you have the two inscriptions that we have referring to the I Parthorum and Araborum, both of them found in Mainz. The frontier that we're mainly going to be concerned about here is Zugma, later a legionary base. We'll make reference to Berea, which is modern Aleppo. The site of Anabarsis is up in this area on the Euphrates River. And of course, we'll make also reference to Sura and Kalinikum. Kalinikum, of course, is modern Raqqa that's been in the news of late. Okay. Every generation of Romans from the 1st century BC until the 7th century AD experienced either a crisis or a war with an Iranian neighbor. First the Parthians, later the Sassanids. Roman sources often seem to generate the impression of a bipolar Greco-Roman versus an Iranian world separated by the Euphrates River. Thus it may surprise that Parthian units served in the Roman army. It would be analogous perhaps to Russian combat units in the U.S. Army during the height of the Cold War. But such units there were. One, the horsearchers of the I Augusta Parthorum, is attested for roughly 4 centuries, one of the longest-serving auxilia units known. A similar unit of Parthians and Arabs, the I Parthorum at Araborum, survived only a generation before its disappearance, but it bequeathed 2 extraordinary tombstones from its station on the Rhine near Mainz, which we will look at today. Even more surprising, given the generally perceived notion that Parthians fielded only horse archers and heavily armored lancers or cataphracts, an infantry unit, a cohors Parthorum, apparently served in Mauritania Tingitana, the little corner, western corner of modern Morocco, in the 2nd century. It was probably a cohors equitata, a combination of horse and infantry. In addition, Parthians, both units and individuals, served as allies or mercenaries with Roman armies in eastern operations during the civil wars of the 40s BC. Parthians fought with the liberator forces of Brutus and Cassius at Philippi in 42 BC against Octavian and Mark Antony. Parthians could attain high advancement. A Marcus Ulpius Cressimus in the time of Marcus Aurelius or later belonged to the Equites Singulares, the emperor's elite horse guard. From the 3rd century on, the number of trans-Euphrates units proliferated. In late antiquity, various cataphract units called Parthian, Persian, and Palmyrene are known. Roman annexation of northern Mesopotamia opened new reserves of manpower, and for the 4th century, we find various peoples of not only northern Mesopotamia, but also Armenians, Iberians, that is Georgians, and tribes of the eastern Black Sea coast being recruited. But today's discussion will be limited to the period before the 4th century. The Euphrates offers a false demarcation of Roman and Parthian spheres. As a border, only the middle Euphrates, roughly the area from Zugma downstream to Sur or Kalinikum, comes into question in the first 2 centuries AD, and even then only as a de facto border, which Rome did not recognize de jure. Pompey's annexation of Syria in 64 BC left the Euphrates borderlands in control of local dynasts and tribal chieftains, a situation unchanged until Tiberius' reign, when Germanicus's reorganization of the East in 18 AD put the legion 10th Fretensis at Zugma, for decades the only legionary camp directly on the river. And at some point, also in the 1st century, at least until 88 AD, there was a cohors secunda prima fidelis occupying a small fort just upstream from Sura. These are the only Roman units actually on the middle Euphrates River in the 1st century. Before the late Empire, the East remained an open frontier, entrusting defense to geography and limiting Roman forts to the key communications nodes and water sources. Nor was organization more rigorous on the Parthian side. South of the kingdom of Osrhoene, based on Edessa and vacillating between Rome and Parthia until the 2nd century, lay the more shadowy district of Anthemusia, under a tribal chieftain or phylarch in the time of Trajan's Parthian War. A Parthian strategos, based at Dura Europus, administered the area south of Anthemusia along the river as a Parthian province called Mesopotamia and Paramotamia. Neither imperial power exercised strict control of the border. Its porous character permitted passage of refugees and exiles, besides intrigues of local dynasts and fluid loyalties under changing political circumstances. Taking an analogy from the Wild West of Hollywood cinema, at times the Euphrates frontier could resemble the Wild East. Yet the Euphrates by no means constituted a cultural divide. On the upper Euphrates, north of Zugma, Armenian was spoken on both sides of the Euphrates, as was Aramaic along the middle Euphrates. Romans and Roman-era writers could be ethnographically lazy in labeling anyone from east of the Euphrates a Parthian. The Jewish historian Josephus called the Artaxiad Armenian king Artavasdes II, and he's the son of the great Tigranes II, he called him a Parthian. And Mark Antony's preparations for an invasion of Media Atropatene via Armenia in 36 BC included acquiring translators of the Parthian and Syrian languages. Even more curious is the background of the Antiochus we're going to meet today on one of the two tombstones. Antiochus is a Greek name, but he identifies himself as a Parthian from Anazarbus in Roman Cilicia. Now, some questions that may immediately arise are, why did Rome want Parthians in their army, and how did they get them? One so-called lesson Rome learned in the Second Punic War against Carthage was the limited quality of Italian cavalry and the need for specialists in missile weapons. And I don't deny that Italians can ride horses and use bows and arrows. But an obvious disparity of skill stimulated reliance on allies to supply cavalry, slingers, and archers, especially in the asymmetrical conflicts between barbarians in provincial areas. Barbarians often shunned direct confrontation with legionary infantry in open pitched battles. Accurate archery from horseback can be taught, but the better performers learned the skill from childhood. Hence the particular value of native horse archers, of which the Parthians, of course, offer a prime example. Once Rome acquired Syria and became more involved on the ground in the Levant, recruitment of archers ensued. Most Syrian units of auxilia were archers. The Etrurians of southern Lebanon were particularly prized, and units from the former kingdom of Commagene in southern Anatolia seem to have been archers. Augustan campaigns in Germany brought a concentration of Levantine units to the Rhine. Etrurians are now known in the Mainz area as early as about 5 BC. Hence, no surprise that the two best-known Parthian units both served on the Rhine. Rome, also always seeking a few good men wherever they could find them, had no qualms about recruiting Parthians. Further, recruitment of Parthians did not always mean formation of distinct units of Parthians. The ethnic homogeneity of auxilia units diminished after the first generation of service, given the practice of local recruitment for replacements, particularly when the unit no longer served in or near its home province. Such applies to Eastern units as well. 4 members of the cohors secunda circestarum, for whom a hometown is known, hailed from Berea, modern Aleppo, not from Syrian Cyrrhus or even the Circestia. Parthians could be brigaded with other ethnics. At Philippi in 42 BC, in Crassus' forces, Parthians served together with Medes and Arabs. What happened to them thereafter is unknown, but if they continued in service rather than going home, they could have joined other units. Such appears the case centuries later, when Severus Alexander hastened back to the Rhine frontier from his Persian War of 232 to confront a German threat. He brought with him a contingent of Parthian mercenaries, unclear whether this is real Parthians are just an archaism, along with units of Ostroanian and Armenian archers. The Parthians, Ostroanians, and Armenians were collected then into an irregular archer unit called Ostroanians. It's epigraphically attested under a praepositus. This new concentration of Easterners around Mainz recalls the earlier amalgam there of Etrurians, Syrians, and Parthians between the time of Augustus and the Flavians. Now, so far as Alexander Severus' group is concerned, Maximinus Thrax made good use of them in his subsequent German offensive. Perhaps many more Parthians served in the auxiliary units than the meager sources permit to ascertain. It should be noted, however, that Parthian units before the late empire were never stationed in the east, except for occasional service in Parthian wars of the 2nd century. Doubters of Roman strategy should take note. This was a policy decision from the center. It wasn't a local centurion deciding where you put your Parthian units. In comparison, we can note that the Parthians are said to have shipped the 10,000 Roman POWs captured at Carrhae off to Merv in Margiana to help guard Parthia's northeastern frontier. Parthians are doing the same thing as the Romans, shipping them as far away as possible from the Euphrates frontier. Now, the avenues of recruitment of Parthians can be summarized in 4 categories. First, mercenaries. Second, prisoners of war. 3, refugees, exiles, and hostages associated with Parthian dynastic strife. And 4, retinues and bodyguards associated with the feudal. I have to do that if there's any medievalists present. They always get upset by calling something feudal. The feudal structure of Iranian society. For mercenaries, many Roman auxiliary units originated as essentially mercenary bands under native commanders. By the 3rd century, many of the irregular auxiliary units that are simply called numeri, or numbers, were probably mercenaries. A numerus of unspecified Orientals appears in papyri of the 3rd century, and mercenaries called salarati peregrini, foreigners getting paid a salary, are supplemented the notable 20th cohort of Palmyrines at Dura Europus. For Parthians, mercenaries formed a regular part of Parthian forces, although this is misrepresented in a key passage in Herodian, which is also mistranslated by C.R. Whitaker in the Loeb edition. Parthian solicitation of Iranian-speaking tribes north of the Caucasus and in Central Asia is something that's already well known. Components of the bodyguards and personal retinues of Arsacid kings are thought to have been mercenaries. Sarmatian Alans in Parthian service even appear in the 2nd century Greek novel, the Babyloniaca of one Iamblichus, extant in only fragments. The size of forces that could be assembled hastily for Roman-Parthian confrontations in northern Mesopotamia would also indicate the abundance of local talent that was available. POWs are harder to trace. We've already mentioned Marcus Ulpius Cressimus in the Equites Singularis under Marcus Aurelius or later. Given the date of his attestation and his Roman name, he must surely be the son of a POW from the time of Trajan's Parthian War 114 through 117. At least some of the Parthians among the Easterners that Severus Alexander brought to the Rhine, already mentioned, they were probably POWs. Parthian dynastic strife in the late 1st century BC and the first half of the 1st century AD could be bloody and generated exiles and refugees. Parthian nobles who fled to Roman territory for their safety did not come alone, but rather brought their retinues with them. In the first known case, Munices, who is not attested as an Arsacid, circa 37 BC, fled the bloodbath associated with Phraates IV's accession in 38 BC, precisely when Mark Antony was preparing for his Parthian expedition. The prospect of Manesi's collaboration with Antony prompted for Euphrates IV's reconciliation with the fugitive. In the best attested case, a Babylonian Jew, Zamaris, probably a local magnate fleeing the turmoil associated with the shadowy Parthian pretender, one Mithridates, between 12 and 9 BC, crossed the Euphrates with a war band of about 600, of which 500 were horse archers. The Syrian governor, Gaius Sentius Saturninus, was taken by surprise. What to do with a potentially troublesome Parthian war band, unsolicited, unwanted, and a possible source of irritation in Roman-Parthian relations? Eventually, Herod the Great of Judea agreed to settle them in the northeastern portion of his kingdom as a military colony to counter banditry and protect Mesopotamian Jews on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Interesting is that Zamaris' sons later organized a Babylonian bodyguard for the Herodian kings Agrippa I and II, and a grandson served Agrippa II as a general in the Jewish war. The horse archers that we see in Agrippa II's army were the offspring of Zamaris' Parthian war band. Personal retinues probably account for the first Parthian units. The Parthian pretender Tiridates, who gave Euphrates IV fits in the 30s and 20s BC, had a role in establishment of the Prima Parthorum, but more on that later. Let us now turn to a second surprise comparable to that of Zamaris that occurred just a few years later. A certain Ornospates, not attested as an Arsacid, fled the Parthian turmoil associated with the reign of either Euphrates V, 32 BC to AD 4, or that of his successor Orodes III, AD 4 through 6. Hence we have yet another unsolicited and unwanted Parthian band in Syria. In this case, the Roman manpower crisis, which the Pannonian revolt of 6 through 9 AD provoked, offered a solution. Ornospates fought with distinction in suppression of the Pannonian revolt, probably as the leader of an irregular Parthian unit formed from his retinue. He received Roman citizenship for his efforts. But the plot thickens. 30 years later, when we next encounter him, in 36, he has returned to Parthia and is Artabanus II's governor of Mesopotamia. Details escape us. But he may have been one of the Parthians with whom the one-time Parthian, then Armenian king Vonones intrigued while essentially under close Roman supervision in Syrian Antioch 16 through 18. Indeed, Ornospates in 36 supported Rome's candidate Tiridates, Euphrates IV's grandson, to replace Artabanus on the Parthian throne. He supplied Tiridates with several thousand cavalry, whether mercenaries or his own retainers is unclear, and the areas of his province, Anthemusia and Nicophorium, supported the pretender. Subsequently, Ornospates disappears from the sources. As I argue, remnants of this Tiridates army have a direct connection with the formation of the I Parthorum at Araborum. We can now turn to some details about the two best-known Parthian units. As the handout shows, the I Augusta Parthorum appears with several different names in various inscriptions. This is not unusual for auxilia units and complicates, of course, tracing the history of a unit. The name, just to give you a parallel example, there is a Gallic Allah, which is attested under 6 different names in the same province. You would expect the Romans to be more consistent. They weren't. Although some have tried to multiply the number of Parthian units from these different titles, I have argued elsewhere that there's only one unit and variant titles for it. The earliest attestation of the Alla Augusta Parthorum is a tombstone from Clesa in Dalmatia, recording the passage at age 26 of a Tiberius Julius Maximus, a decurio, or squadron commander. His hometown is given as Rome. The deceased name gives no indication of a Parthian origin. Only the father's name, Gaius Julius Tiridates, reveals a Parthian connection. As long agreed, the context of this text is the Pannonian revolt of 6 through 9 AD, as the ally Parthorum is not otherwise attested in Dalmatia or Pannonia. The deceased father is almost certainly the Parthian pretender Tiridates, in residence at Rome from 23 BC, and given Roman citizenship. The absence of stipendia or years of service in the Clesid text may, but not necessarily, indicate Maximus's demise in his initial year of service, although only assumption ties this omission to the date of the Alla Parthorum's creation. Maximus could have joined an existing unit. There is no evidence that he died in combat. Sextus Coelius, who put up the inscription, was probably Maximus's heir, or perhaps just another Conrad in the unit. Notably, a rereading of the stone in 1962 permits adding more details and context. The initial letter of the text is really the ligature TI, indicating Tiberius. That is, it is not the expected Gaius Julius that would come from him being the son of Gaius Julius Tiridates. He's Tiberius Julius. Now, of course, he inherited his citizenship from his father, but he owed the citizenship not at all to doing anything in the Pannonian Revolt. Indeed, no strict rules are known for governing the selection of praenomina for sons of new citizens as opposed to old citizens naming sons. The choice of Tiberius, however, suggests the father Tiridates' special attachment to Tiberius, the future emperor, a link formed, given the deceased age of 26 in AD 6 through 9, in the period around 20 BC. Further details are elusive and only invite speculation, but you have to ask, did Tiridates serve as an Eastern advisor to Tiberius? We don't know, but you have to ask the question. We should also note that none of the Parthian princes at Rome, when Phraates IV entrusted to Augustus' care in 10 or 11 BC, nor their offspring received citizenship. A Parthian prince with Roman citizenship could hardly serve in the role of a viable candidate for the Arsacid throne when Rome tried to supply new Parthian kings in 836 and 47. Augustus had denied support in 23 BC for a third attempt of Tiridates to seize the throne in Ctesiphon, and bestowal of Roman citizenship no doubt eliminated any further hopes he had of such. In any case, given the now known connection of Tiridates to Tiberius and common Roman practice in such matters, we can posit that the young Maximus went to the Rhine frontier in 4 AD as part of the staff of Tiberius, when Tiberius resumed command of the eastern frontier. Maximus later received, while there, a commission as decurio in the Alla Parthorum, already in service with other Levantine units, archers on that front. A likely second connection of the young Maximus with the Alla Parthorum is that unit's probable origins in the large retinue that his father Tiridates brought with him when he fled Parthia circa 25 BC. Rome could not tolerate maintenance of foreign retinues in Italy for obvious reasons of security. Exiled German princes accorded Roman hospitality were detached from their retinues. The same must have applied to the Parthian princes in residence. Chances are some or all of Tiridates' retinue was organized as the Alla Parthorum and sent off to the Rhine frontier. The second earliest piece of evidence for the Alla Parthorum, a silver ring found at Neuss, would also seem to indicate Parthian service on the Rhine, although not necessarily a posting at Neuss. If I am correct, the Alla Parthorum was originally stationed on the Rhine, moved to Dalmatia for the Pannonian Revolt, and subsequently returned to the Rhine. To which stage of service the ring belongs, whether pre or post Pannonian Revolt service, cannot be determined. But the use of the archaic form of the relative pronoun quoe in place of the classical cui perhaps points to an early date. We further learn from the ring's text that the Alla Parthorum was organized as a regular auxilia unit commanded by a praefectus and organized into squadrons called termi. Its epithet of veterana, probably a regimental title rather than one bestowed by the emperor, should be taken to indicate being battle-tested. Often a unit became veterana when a new unit of the same name was created, and the new one was then called nova or new, but we have no such parallel for the Alla Parthorum. A connection of the Alla Parthorum with the Teutoburg forest disaster and subsequent operations is unknown. But this unit must certainly be the horsearchers in Germanicus's army at Edistavisto in 16 AD, mentioned by Tacitus. All other archer units on the Rhine at this time were infantry. Only the Alla Parthorum was a cavalry unit. Now, why Tacitus didn't say they were Parthians, you have to ask Tacitus. I can't explain that. The unit's subsequent history can be recounted more briefly. At some point after 16, but before 39, the Alla was transferred to northwestern Spain, as some recently discovered stamped tiles now reveal. There it remained for about 3/4 of a century, before its transfer to Mauritania's Caesariensis, modern Morocco, at some point before 100. Its first attestation dates to 107. It's a military diploma. There it would remain for about 2.5 centuries, but not exclusively. At least 3 inscriptions show that this unit of horse archers fought in Trajan's Parthian War, 114 to 117. Most probably it came east with the notable Lucius Quietus and contingents of the famed Maori cavalry, javelin throwers, not archers. I think I have a... Here you see the dreadlocks of the Maori cavalry from Trajan's column. Lucius Quietus, who had distinguished himself in Trajan's Dacian wars, faded into obscurity thereafter, only to have his career revived in the Parthian War, and he eventually attained the consulship. Quietus' removal from the governorship of Judea and subsequent murder early under Hadrian provoked revolt in Mauritania, but it's not clear when the Alla Parthorum returned to its home province. It is not attested for service either in the Dacian and Sarmatian problems on the Danube between 118 and 122. Lucius Verus' Parthian War, 161 through 166, brought the Alla Parthorum back to the east again. Its activity included recruitment, a partial restocking of a Parthian unit with Easterners. Participation in Septimius Severus' Parthian campaigns is not on record, although officers of the Alla Parthorum in the 3rd century could advance to high positions, including membership in Gallienus' mobile field army. The unit is last attested in Mauritania in 355, but it again came east to fight Iranians, either in Constantius II's campaigns against Sapor II or Julian's Persian expedition of 363. This time, it remained in the east, as the Alla Prima Parthorum at Razaia in Osroene, as noted in the Notitia Dignitatum. We now turn to the 2 inscriptions of the Alla Parthorum at Araborum from Mainz. Let's turn to Maurus stone, which is the highlight of the lecture. Here we find Maurus stone with its dramatic relief of a horse archer in Parthian attire, accompanied on foot by his callow or soldier's servant. Here's Marius. He's wearing his baggy pantaloons, shooting his bow, and Tigranes is carrying an extra supply of arrows for him. The inscription shows a variety of names. You can identify Aramaic names such as Maris, Casitas, Armenian or Iranian names, Variagnes, Tigranes, and Arab or maybe Iranian name Massakates. A hometown is not listed. The relief relieves no doubt about an ala of horse archers. Antiochus' simpler stone, in comparison, this one's quite boring. It's just basically the text. But we find in Antiochus' simpler stone Greek names, Antiochus, Pelisippus, but the stone declares the deceased a Parthus from Anazarbus, and with a unique rank, Triplicarius. Going back to Maris, experts on Roman military equipment have identified his quiver here on the back as a particular special type of quiver that can be identified with similar quivers found from Crimean, Parthian, and Palmyrene horse archers. This further proves that he's an Easterner. References to terma, stipendia, and evocatus suggest a regular ally organized on the Roman model, like the alla prima Augusta Parthorum, and not an irregular numerus. Maris, with an unusual 30 stipendia, or 30 years of service, never rose above eques, nor apparently received Roman citizenship, although several pre-Flavian Eastern archers and others on the Rhine or in the Balkans likewise served well beyond the usual 25 years. One can ask, did Maris, without citizenship, reach his 30 stipendia in part through service unmentioned in his epitaph in another unit? We don't know. Antiochus' text also admits some details of his career. Neither stone displays the trianomina or a Roman tribe, which is the way Roman citizens had to be identified. Antiochus' citizenship is only implied by his promotion to evocatus and receipt of dona militaria, military decorations or medals. In both texts, a brother's dedication of the stone could suggest recruitment as a family affair, although in neither does the brother declare membership in the ala. Indeed, frater, or brother, could simply mean fellow soldier, as we see in other documents such as the Vindolanda text and elsewhere. Curiously, the more elaborate stone, go back to Maris, he's fun to look at. No, he's there. Belongs to the more elaborate stone belongs to the non-citizen Maris. Agreed is only the two texts pre-Flavian date, that is before 70, although the degree of their contemporaneity is unclear. Attempts at more precise dates from the stone style, lettering, and the text's internal data have not yielded decisive results. Indeed, the text of Antiochus, a Parthian from Cilician Anazarbus, and the son of an Antiochus, presents even more riddles. I forego cataloging various views. In my own opinion, Antiochus's Parthus is probably an ethnic cognomen indicating the speaker of a Parthian tongue, such as Armenian, unwritten before the 5th century and full of cognates from the Median and Parthian dialects of Persian. As noted, Parthian in Roman practice could be used loosely. Indeed, the Alla Parthorum at Araborum has likely Armenian connections, seen not least in the Armenian name of the Deturio Variagnes. Further, Antiochus's extraordinary career leaps from eques, or simple cavalryman, to evocatus triplicarius with only 10 years of service or stipendia, and the receipt of unspecified dona militaria, which are not awarded to non-citizens or auxiliaries. Triplicarius is a hapax, or single-time occurrence, and perhaps it represents yet another irregularity of the text, like the omission of the trianomena. For surely Antiochus was awarded citizenship before his promotion to Euocatus, a post often held by praetorians and the general equivalent of centurion. Promotion to Euocatus normally came at a career's end after extensive service. Euocati were often trainers or even commanders of irregular units and did not serve as Euocati in the same unit from which they were discharged. There's a nice Augustan era parallel of a certain Gaius Macer, who was also Euocatus and became commander of an irregular unit. Auxiliary duplicari, or double pay, centurions and centurions could be recently enfranchised citizens, and some of them often had previous legionary service. Accordingly, Antiochus' career could be reconstructed as follows. Originally recruited with the I Parthorum at Araborum as an eques, and later transferred to another unnamed unit, he gained citizenship and became a duplicarius. This is his missing mid-career. Then promoted to Euocatus, he served another 10 years, perhaps with his original unit. Thus, his 10 stipendia represent his time as an Euocatus only and do not represent his entire career. Triplicarius may indicate either his increased pay from duplicarius, triple pay instead of double pay, imprecisely represented as if a rank, or he could represent promotion to decurio. If the latter, designation as triplicarius for decurio is most curious, although when you look at pre-Flavian practices in the army, these are often, the situation is still in flux about how to organize these units and exact Rangordnung, as the Germans would say, of promotions. So, I mean, the fact that it doesn't agree with later times doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. Of course, also, the absence of the trianomena and a tribe in a text of an auxiliary person, particularly one from the earlier times, is not really significant. It happens all the time. The obscurity of his unspecified dona may reflect political correctness, as I'll mention later. Alternatively, we do not know that Antiochus, a native of Anabarsis, resided there when he was recruited. He could have been recruited elsewhere, and only his time in the I Parthorum at Araborum as eques is explicitly attested. His service as an Euocatus could have been with either his own unit or possibly in another unit. Perhaps he only retired to Mainz to be near old comrades and or his brother. Much is unknown. Many Roman auxiliaries and even legionaries, when they retired, they preferred to stay close to their old unit where their buddies were. I mean, this is well known. Maris's and Antiochus's career invite speculation rather than defining the context of the I Parthorum at Araborum's origins. Without doubt, however, this Allah is a new unit directly recruited from Parthians and Arabs in the east, not Parthian refugees and exiles at Rome. As no units of Arabs are attested, an amalgamation of two existing corps has no foundation, nor can this Allah be, as some think, the unit of the Klisa text reinforced by Nabatean Arabs after its transfer to the Rhine, where no Nabatean Arabs are ever attested. As already mentioned, the I Prima Augusta Parthorum had departed for Spain before 39, and the texts of the I Parthorum at Araborum put it in Mainz circa 50 and no doubt later. Thus, all schemes identifying these two different Parthian units evaporate, the ones already gone to Spain and eventually to Mauritania. The peculiar combo of Parthians and Arabs fits the period 37-38, when Caligula revived several annexed client kingdoms, including Armenia Minor, and appointed new kings, many among his own familiars. In 37, Pontus and Armenia Minor went respectively to Julius Pontus II, Julius Polemo II, and Cottus, grandsons of Queen Pythodorus of Pontus, dead in 33. Caligula later added some part of Arabia to Cotys' dominion. The context of the origin of the Alla Parthorum at Araborum lies in events of 37 through 41 on both the Euphrates and the Rhine. Caligula not only revamped organization of the eastern frontier through revival of client kingdoms, but also concentrated forces on the Rhine for his plans regarding Germany and Britain, the source of bizarre anecdotes tied to his defamation in the sources. Cassius Dio reports that Roman forces on the Rhine increased to 200,000 to 250,000, more than doubling the previous manpower. Legions and auxilia were summoned from all parts of the empire, and both new legions and new auxilia units were raised. Of the new auxilia units, at least 5 ally and 3 cohorts all had double ethnic names. I would add to this list the Alla Parthorum at Araborum. Certainly, Caligula's concentration of forces on the Rhine and the creation of new units, auxiliary as well as legionary, affords a Western context for the Alla Parthorum at Araborum's formation. Indeed, Antiochus's obscure Dona Militaria could be explained through Caligula's creation of a new Corona Exploratoria, a crown given for reconnaissance, first attested in 80 during Caligula's own Trans-Rhine expedition. This corona was not subsequently awarded. Hence, one could argue that Antiochus's Dona received this award. He mentioned getting the reward, but he didn't want to say who gave it to him. And this also occurs later in the Emperor Domitian. Yeah, you got promoted under Domitian, or you got Dona Militaria from Domitian, but you don't say who gave them to you or who promoted you. You suffered damnatio memoriae, and you just keep your mouth shut if you got a reward under that particular emperor. An Eastern context also fits the creation of this Alla, circa 38, in the aftermath of the Armenian Parthian crisis of 34 through 37. I forego recounting the details of this crisis. In the end, Mithridates of Iberia occupied the Armenian throne. A Roman attempt to put Tiridates, Phraates IV's grandson, on the throne in Ctesiphon failed, and a supposed conference on a pontoon bridge in the middle of the Euphrates between Artabanus II and Lucius Vitellius, the Syrian governor. This is something that's grossly exaggerated with all kinds of fantastic details in the sources. What happened in this conference was essentially Rome recognized Artabanus II's legitimacy against the pretender Tiridates, and in return, the Parthians renounced further adventures trying to put Arsacid on the Armenian throne. Tiridates' supporters had included, as I mentioned earlier, Ornaspates. We already met him as the commander of Parthian irregulars in the Pannonian Revolt and awarded citizenship by Tiberius. But in 36, he is now Artabanus II's prefect or governor of Mesopotamia. Ornaspates supplied Tiridates with several thousand cavalry, some of which were probably mercenaries. Intriguingly, Ornaspates, pertinent to discussions of the first Parthian auxilia, now resurfaces in the context of the Alla Parthorum at Araborum's creation. Although Ornaspates soon vanishes from Tacitus' narrative, the thousands of cavalry he supplied may not have evaporated so quickly. With the collapse of this coup, Tiridates escaped to Syria with the remnants of his forces. We hear no more of him. Tiridates probably returned to Rome to live in obscurity. But his forces, which had included many Syrian and northern Mesopotamian Arabs, were in Syria and had to be dealt with. About a year later, Caligula appointed Cotys king of Armenia Minor. The Alla Parthorum at Araborum has its origins in the remnants of Tiridates' army, probably including some mercenaries hired by Ornaspates, supplemented with recruits from Cotys' new dominions, Armenia Minor and Arabia. The latter is to be understood, as I have argued some years ago, as Armenian Sophani. Caligula's massive increase of the Rhine army provided the impetus for the formation, and the survivors of Tiridates' now unwanted Parthian army in Syria supplied the new unit's core. Thus, the unit's peculiar double ethnic can be accounted for. This unit, whose ethnic variety emerges from the onomastic analysis of known members, became Parthorum not only because some of its members spoke so-called Parthian languages like Armenian or Aramaic, but also because it partially derived from Tiridates' Parthian army. The diversity of recruits for this ala could be easily explained. Parthians with Greek names, Antiochus Bellissippus, and the Aramaic Maris, all of whom are veterans of the 36-37 campaign. The ethnic variety of northern Mesopotamia is underappreciated. Representative, although historically suspect, is Valerian's dispatch of a composite force to Aurelian against the Goths. This comes from the Historia Augusta. He sent him 300 Etrurian archers, 600 Armenians, 150 Arabs, 20 Saracens, and 400 Mesopotamians. We can also note that Armenian Sophene, once extended down to the modern Tur Dabin, Armenia at times possessed Gordiani and Nisibis, and northwestern Mesopotamia, including Osroene, contained a mixture of Armenians, Arabs, Arameans, and Syrians. Sophene could be considered Syrian, and the degree of Semitic influence in southern and southwestern Armenia is only recently receiving proper attention. Vegetius, who wrote on veterinary medicine as well as military affairs, praised the quality of Sophenian horses. Variagnes, the decurio of Marius's Terma, surely suggests a recruitment of Armenians, but such could occur from Sophene, Armenia Minor, Cappadocia, or even northern Mesopotamia. Indeed, Variagnes, a veteran of earlier Roman service, probably had Roman citizenship, as noted earlier for other auxiliary officers. If so, this Variagnes would be the first known non-royal Armenian to have Roman citizenship. Further, the military potential of Armenia Minor should not be underestimated, if underreported. And this all goes back to Mithridates VI Eupator of Pontus, and I will forego getting into details. In fact, the fame of horse archers from Armenia Minor continues into the mid-4th century, and late Roman Armenian units probably derived from the late Roman provinces of Armenia Primus and Secunda, which are the former Armenia Minor and the Cappadocian Strategia of Melitene. Little more remains to be said about the Ala Parthorum at Araborum. Cottus, as king of Armenia Minor, has less to do with its formation than Caracalla's extraordinary buildup of forces on the Rhine and the potential nuisance of a Parthian army's remains in Syria. So far as known, this ala remained in the Mainz area, and like some other Eastern auxiliary units, disappeared or was disbanded circa 70 in the chaos following Julius Quilla's revolt on the lower Rhine. There's some legions were disbanded and reorganized, some auxiliary units just disappeared. To my mind, this is what happened to this particular Parthian ala. It got caught up in the chaos following Quilla's revolt. It doesn't mean the soldiers were all discarded. It certainly doesn't mean they were executed. The unit itself was disbanded, and the soldiers may have gone to other units, or they may have retired. A final question can only be discussed today most briefly. How ethnically homogeneous did specialist auxiliary units remain over time? As generally agreed, auxiliary units lost most of their original ethnic composition by the second or third generation of service or earlier, especially if the unit transferred from its area of origin and subsequently depended on local recruitment to refill its ranks. Ethnic units named after their native commanders had ceased after about 27 AD. You no longer get that sort of mercenary type of auxiliary unit with which they originated. Units of tactical specialties like Eastern archers are thought an exception. Such units, some argue, were restocked from their homelands to maintain a high level of specialist skills. Some dispute this, claiming archer units ceased to practice the specialty for which they were created, and replacements from the homeland of such units cannot be demonstrated. Here we come to a 2nd century tombstone of a member of the I Parthorum in Mauritania, which has become a focal point of the debate. This is the text of Rufinus. He's on page 2 of your handout. He is a veteran of a Parthian war. Whether Trajan's or Lucius Verus's is unclear. He is shown mounted. He carries a shield, and he hurls a javelin in the mode of the native Moorish cavalry. But he's not wearing his baggy Parthian pants, as we see that we saw that Marus was wearing in his tombstone from century and a half earlier. Now, some argue that this monument proves that the I Parthorum in Mauritania had ceased to be horse archers. As known, in the 2nd and 3rd century, Easterners were prized as archery instructors in various auxiliary units, just as Mauritanians were prized for teaching javelin throwing. But we do know of another horse archer unit, the I Augusta Parthorum, of equal seniority, if not older than the I Parthorum. It also served in Mauritania, and we have a mid-2nd century tombstone of a soldier from this unit showing that it was still an archer unit. Among the military reforms of Hadrian was an emphasis on cross-training in specialist units. For example, horse archers needed to learn how to throw the javelin and also how to use slings. For comparison, we can look to sustained cataphracts, who are often depicted not only as the heavily armored lancer, but they often have a bow and a quiver on the back of their horse. They're not one-dimensional. Now, Rufinus' relief plays on a common motif of horse archers' tombstones. And this is a scene developed among equestrian units on the Rhine in the 1st century. The horseman shown with his soldiers, with his servant behind him supplying extra weapons. It's a common motif on the Rhine in the 1st century among equestrian tombstones. Well, what we have here is just as we have Marus Callo Tigranus is shown on his stone, carrying a special supply of an extra supply of arrows. Rufinus Callo, see him vaguely here in the corner, carrying an extra javelin for him. This is a unique stone. There is no other depiction of a Mauritanian cavalryman with a callo supplying an extra weapon. This is the only known example of this. And I would argue that what's going on here is a tradition that the I Parthorum has brought with it from its time on the Rhine, copying this type of motif in a tombstone. We know it was a permanent Mauritanian unit from about 100, and it no doubt had to adapt to tactical realities in fighting in Mauritania. But this doesn't necessarily mean that it gave up being horse archers. And given the parallels with the Rhine units, I think this is a unique example of Rufinus demonstrating that he has acquired the cross-training type of skill that Hadrian wanted soldiers to follow. And I, in my own opinion, I don't think this is something you can use to argue that the unit ceased to be horse archers and became javelin throwers. In fact, there is now epigraphical evidence we can cite to support this particular argument. We have an inscription of the I Parthorum from the time of Trajan's Parthian War, in which the unit is explicitly attested as Sagittariat. That's, I'm going to find it out. Yeah, it's ILS 9013, and I have it underlined. He was a praefectus alla Parthorum Sagittarium. You're not going to, if well, the one case is true, that this stone proves that they ceased to be horse archers, how can you explain that another inscription, precisely the same date, explicitly names them as Sagittaria? What I think is going on is that Rufinus wants to demonstrate his own personal excellence in acquiring the new tactical skill that Hadrian wanted Auxilia to perform. It doesn't prove that the whole unit ceased to be horse archers. Now, as a final point, as for the issue of restocking specialist units from the original homeland, the evidence is indeed slight, but that's true not only for this Parthian unit, but for all auxiliary units. Local recruitment for the Alla Parthorum cannot be denied and would coincide with the agreed development of auxiliary units. We know from inscriptions from Spain and elsewhere that Gauls and Spaniards already infiltrated the ranks of the Alla in its Spanish period. And with one exception, all members of the Alla in its Mauritanian period bear typical Roman names, although the epigraphical evidence chiefly concerns prefects or decuriones, and that doesn't prove anything about the ethnicity of the unit. Particularly with the praefecti, these people are pursuing equestrian careers. They can be put in command of any auxiliary unit. It has nothing to do with the ethnicity of the unit. And so far as the decuriones go, that may mean or may not mean that they were promoted from the ranks to that particular office. Of the rank and file members that are known of the Alla Parthorum in Mauritania, only a single one, Unius Crescanes, can be identified securely as an African. We know this because his mother set up an inscription to him at Regai in western Morocco in 355. This is the last evidence of the unit being in Mauritania before it went to the east. And if we look at other known members of the commanders of this Parthian unit, they all have Western names: Publius Vibius Rufus, Coelius, Sextus Coelius, Julius Maximus we talked about, and the only known prefect of the cohors Parthorum was Lucius Fabius Flaccus. None of them show any traces being Parthians. But of course, this is what's going to happen, because Parthians may be there, but they're disguised, particularly if it's in the second or third generation. As we've seen with Tiberius Julius Maximus, the only reason we know he's a Parthian is because of his father. And in the case of Marcus Ulpius Chrysimus in the Equites Singularis, the only reason we know he's a Parthian because he explicitly tells us he's a Parthian, not Dione Parthos. Alone in the texts of Maris and Antiochus, both of which are first-generation Parthians in their unit, and this is an ethnically mixed unit from the beginning, do they find the expected Eastern names. Given the loose Roman usage of the term Parthian, Easterners from the Euphrates frontier and the Trans-Euphrates area should probably be expected, but not necessarily Iranians exclusively. Nevertheless, recruitments of a Parthian cohort in the 2nd century, use of Parthians and other Trans-Euphrates people on the Rhine in the 230s, complement the availability of Parthians to teach the techniques of Parthian horse archers, as Hadrian ordered, and not to get into Commodus having a Parthian instructor of archery. Deserters, refugees, and POWs from the Parthian wars of Trajan, Verus, and Septimius Severus must have been available in the 2nd and 3rd century, just as they had been in the 1st century, even if not consistently recorded. Surprises like the arrival of Zamaris and his retinue, or that of Ornispates, did not always attract attention in the available sources. Indeed, Eastern recruits or draftees for Mauritanian units do occur. We know of a certain Abalahas Rumei, a soldier in the cohors Secunda Sardorum Equitata in Mauritania Caesariensis. His name is Syrian or even Palmyrene, but there's no evidence of this unit ever being in the east. Yet they have a Syrian or Palmyrene named soldier. And no doubt the Prima Augusta Parthorum restocked during its eastern tours under Trajan and Verus, as is in the explicit case of Marcus Aurelius Appius, a decurio in this unit. We know he's in Verus War because his Roman name is Marcus Aurelius. He was probably recruited during Verus War, and let us note that the name Appius is not otherwise known in Africa, but is common in Palmyra, Osroene, and elsewhere in Mesopotamia. Hadrian's directive that auxilia retain their ethnic identity through continued use of native war cries suggests maintenance of regimental traditions within ethnic units. How ethnically Parthian any of the Parthian units remained over time can be debated. Without rosters, their original ethnic integrity is unknown, and non-Parthians, perhaps from the beginning, became Parthian in the sense of regimental traditions. More importantly, however, in my view, they preserved the skills for which they were recruited. Maintenance of the Alla Prima Augusta Parthorum's character as horse archers held more significance militarily than Rufinus discarding his baggy Parthian pants. And that's all I have to say today. I thank you for your attention.